to the Keystone Biology Review on ecology. For ecology, ecology is the study of interactions between organisms and their environment. So, like all levels of organization for biology that starts with the cell, this really starts at the organism level. Organisms make up populations, which make up communities, which make up ecosystems, which make up biomes, which finally make up the biosphere for life. And of course, with all levels of life organization, you can find all of those common characteristics of life. When we look at the interactions between species and their environment, we make distinguishing factors between those that are biotic, or those that are living, and those that are abiotic, those that are non-living. Organisms are interacting continually with both those living components, the bacteria that are living on you, the food that you are eating, the organisms that you interact with, both of the same species and different species, as well as the abiotic factors, the amount of water, oxygen, temperature, the heat energy in each of these different environments. Life ultimately depends upon matter that is recycled and energy that moves through an ecosystem. So within all ecosystems, they are going to have organisms that can break down and recycle the matter to be returned. And all organisms are going to have to rely upon organic energy sources. So they are going to need organisms within their environment that can transform solar energy into those organic forms of energy, because energy moves through in one direction. If the sun were to stop shining, then our biosphere would not be able to have the energy it needs to maintain those levels of organization. So as energy and matter flow through an ecosystem, we start with what we call producers, primary producers. These are going to take, for the most part, light energy, and again, transform light energy into organic compounds. The primary consumers are going to get the matter that they need and the energy that they need from primary producers. So you can see the flow of matter and energy with these arrows. Primary consumers' energy are going to go to the secondary consumers. So the organisms that do not directly eat plants, although sometimes they can, but they're going to eat everything below them. Secondary consumers' energy goes to tertiary consumers' energy, and tertiary consumers then pass on their energy to quaternary consumers. Ecosystems tend not to have more than 4 levels of consumers because, as you notice, there is only about 10% of the energy from each trophic level that gets passed from one trophic level to the next, because a lot of that is going to either come off from waste or heat energy. And notice how the energy is leaving the system in the form of heat, but that the matter is going to be recycled through the decomposers of the ecosystem. So how does energy move through the ecosystem? Again, it's going to move in one direction. So we can look at this with a simple relationship between organisms in a community with a food chain. Corn is eaten by a rat. Again, notice that the arrow is moving from the corn to the rat because the rat gets its energy and matter from the corn, and then the rat gives its energy to the owl when the owl eats the rat. So simplified version of the interaction between each of these trophic levels of a community. But it's not necessarily realistic. A more realistic representation of what actually happens in terms of energy and matter flow in a community would be a food web, because humans are not going to just eat cows. They're going to get their energy from lots of different things, plants that they're going to eat, other organisms that they are going to consume. And again, this is going to just represent a much more realistic relationship of the interconnectedness of all species in an environment. And just one more point to put out is that you need to have decomposers or detrivores that are going to break down the organic matter and return it to the food, and return the energy, return the matter into the community. Communities are also very dependent upon biodiversity. Biodiversity is the key to success of life at all levels, because the more variation that an individual or a population or a community or an ecosystem or a biome or a biosphere has, the more resilient it's going to be to any change. So the ways that communities interact, besides just passing on energy and matter, they also have close relationships between organisms. So members of a community who do more than just eat one another, but have some other type of close relationship, we call this a symbiosis or a symbiotic relationship. Some examples. There are species that compete, so this could be interspecies or intraspecies, so they can either compete against members of the same population or members of different population. This is an example of plants competing for sunlight. In this competition, there's going to be a winner and there is going to be a loser, so we can represent that with a plus minus. Mutualism is another symbiotic relationship. Here, there's a win-win. So like this example, the bees are going to get nectar and the plants are going to win because they are going to be able to spread their gamete cells to other plants to increase the genetic diversity of their offspring. Plus plus. Next one is predation. There is going to be a winner who gets the energy and a loser who loses its energy. So we represent that with a plus minus. There is parasitism, where there is going to be a winner who will get the nutrients that it needs and a loser who will be deprived of their nutrients, or could possibly even contract a disease which would decrease its fitness for its environment. So plus minus. There is commensalism. Now this one is debatable, but for commensalism, it's where one organism benefits and one organism really doesn't seem to be harmed or helped in either way. So a good example of this would be like a baleen whale and the barnacles that can grow on the whale. The barnacles need a hard substrate to attach so that they can filter feed, just like the whale, but the whales don't seem to be affected in one way or another. So we represent this with plus 0. So how does matter move through an ecosystem? Well, unlike energy, again, matter is going to be recycled. So 3 main forms of matter that life depends on. One is water. So water is going to travel in the environment. It will fall as precipitation. It will possibly aid in eroding, but then go into surface runoff, into groundwater, and then evaporate either from oceans, lakes, or streams, or from transpiration, evaporation from plants, and back into the atmosphere. Carbon, we are organic carbon beings, so this one is also going to move through the atmosphere. Organisms give off carbon dioxide when they undergo cell respiration. In the atmosphere, plants and other producers will take that and put it back into organic matter. Organic creatures like cows or ourselves can also then over time end up as carbon that can be reused as fossil fuels with enough heat, time, and pressure. And nitrogen is another really key important element that life depends upon for its proteins and for its nucleic acids. And here you have atmospheric nitrogen that can come down through lightning and nitrogen fixation. Plants can also have nitrogen fixing bacteria at their roots that can take atmospheric oxygen and convert it into forms that the plant can use. Organisms can also release nitrogen in their waste products, and again with nitrogen fixing bacteria can put that nitrogen back into a soil system so that plants can introduce it back into the ecosystem. So matter is cycled and energy moves in one direction through an ecosystem. Ecosystems can have several disruptions, though, to them, and not just the symbiotic relationships that species share. There are several different factors that can limit population size within an ecosystem. Some of the natural disturbances that can affect an ecosystem would be things like droughts, forest fires, tornado damage, and even dramatic weather events like blizzards. So we call limiting factors that affect all populations equally, regardless of population size and density independent factors. So these are going to be things that will affect large and small populations the same. So a lot of those natural disasters on the last screen would be density independent factors and unusual weather. No matter how big or small your population, you're probably equally affected. But factors that operate strongly when a population is at a high density level, we call these density dependent factors. So the more members, the more packed you are in an area, it's going to increase some of those symbiotic relationships like competition, predation, parasitism, and disease because of overcrowding. And humans also play a huge role in ecosystem disruptions. So we have anthropomorphic factors, which are your anthropogenic disturbances. So when we create new developments, we are taking away habitat from organisms that used to live there. When we are bringing in species where they were not present before and therefore have no natural predators, those are invasive species that can take over and really decrease the biodiversity in an area. Air pollution is going to impact all species in that environment. And cutting off habitat so that you have just these little patches of habitat left can also drastically decrease the biodiversity of the organisms living in this area. So what will happen is typically populations start out with exponential growth, which is a drastic, fast increase in population size. But eventually, in a normal ecosystem, will hit their carrying capacity, the number of organisms that can actually live in that ecosystem. And once they near carrying capacity, they tend to slow down with their population size until it levels out at around their carrying capacity. So we call a really quick, rapid, fast growth with unlimited resources and no limiting factors exponential growth. And then the growth where it nears carrying capacity and the population growth rate slows way down is logistic growth. So when populations reach their carrying capacity, their population growth rate absolutely slows down and or decreases. Sometimes it might hover around carrying capacity and kind of ebb and flow. And last, when we look at these ecosystems, if we look over time at different types of records, marine sediment records, fossil records, we have evidence that there have been 5 major mass extinction events. But the important thing to note is that even though this biosphere had a drastic reduction of biodiversity, if you look after each one of these events, what happened is a sudden increase of biodiversity. And this really is because life finds a way. It will occupy new food sources that are now in plenty because of those extinct animals or organisms. It's going to occupy new niches within its environment. It's going to go through something called adaptive radiation and very quickly be able to have new adaptations find success. So, although you can have these dramatic extinction events, typically you are going to have biodiversity greatly increase to allow for the biosphere to rebound from that disturbance. I hope this helps. Have a great day.